Elena Whitmore had learned one painful lesson long before she understood what it meant to be loved. Sometimes, the people who share your blood can be the ones who make you feel the most alone. At 22 years old, Elena had spent nearly her entire life on the Whitmore Ranch in the harsh frontier country. The ranch was surrounded by dry grasslands, distant mountains, and endless stretches of wilderness where a person could ride for hours without seeing another soul. To outsiders, the Whitmore Ranch looked prosperous. There were horses in the corrals, cattle in the distant fields, and a large wooden house overlooking the valley. But inside that house, Elena had never felt like she belonged. Her father had died when she was 14. After his death, everything changed. Her two older brothers, William and Thomas, took control of the ranch. They considered themselves the heads of the family, and Elena quickly learned that her opinion no longer mattered. She worked from before sunrise until late at night. She fed the chickens, she milked the cows, she cooked breakfast, she cleaned the house, she repaired clothing, she prepared dinner. She even helped care for her brother William's young children. Yet nobody thanked her. If something went wrong, Elena was blamed. If something went right, someone else received the credit. Her sister-in-law Margaret often reminded her that she was lucky to have a roof over her head. "You have no husband," Margaret would say. "No money, no property. What exactly do you expect?" Elena never answered. She had learned that silence was safer than arguing. But despite the cruelty around her, Elena remained kind. If she found an injured bird, she cared for it. If an old neighbor needed food, she quietly left a basket outside their door. If one of the ranch horses was frightened, Elena was often the person who could calm it. Her brothers called this weakness. They were wrong. Her kindness was not weakness. It was the strongest part of her. One cold autumn evening, Elena was carrying firewood toward the house when she heard voices coming from the dining room. She stopped. The door was slightly open. William was speaking. "We're leaving in 2 weeks." Elena froze. Thomas answered, "What about Elena?" There was silence. Then William sighed. "She isn't coming." Elena's fingers tightened around the firewood. Thomas sounded uncomfortable. "She is our sister. She is a burden," William replied. Elena felt as if someone had struck her. A few seconds later, Margaret spoke. "She has no husband and no money. Nobody is going to take responsibility for her." Elena stood completely still. She had spent years believing that perhaps, somewhere beneath their harshness, her brothers still cared about her. Now she understood. They did not. William continued, "We'll give her a few coins and some clothes." "She can find work somewhere," Thomas asked, "and if she refuses?" William's answer was cold. "She won't have a choice." Elena quietly walked away. She placed the firewood beside the kitchen and went to her tiny room. She closed the door. Only then did she allow herself to cry. She looked around at the room she had slept in since childhood. There was an old wooden box beside the bed. Inside it were the few things she had kept from her father: a faded photograph, a silver button from his coat, and a small handkerchief. Elena held the photograph against her chest. "I tried," she whispered. She had tried so hard to be useful. She had tried to be obedient. She had tried to earn their love. And now she realized something devastating. Love should never have to be earned by suffering. The following morning, William entered her room. "You're leaving tomorrow." Elena looked up. "Where am I supposed to go?" William shrugged. "Find work." "What about the ranch?" "It isn't yours." "What about Father's wishes?" William's expression hardened. "Father is dead." The words crushed the last hope she had. William placed a small cloth bag on the bed. Inside were 2 dresses, a few coins, and an old blanket. "That is all you need." Elena stared at the bag. She wanted to ask him why. She wanted to ask how a brother could abandon his own sister. But she knew the answer. He simply did not care enough to ask himself those questions. Before sunrise the next morning, Elena left, away from the ranch, carrying the small bag over her shoulder. She did not say goodbye. No one came outside to stop her. No one called her name. No one even watched her leave. That hurt more than anything. For several hours, she followed the trail west. She did not know where she was going. She only knew where she could no longer stay. By afternoon, clouds gathered over the mountains. The wind became stronger. Then rain began falling. At first, Elena tried to continue, but the trail quickly became muddy. Her shoes became soaked. Her dress clung to her legs. The wind cut through her thin clothing. By sunset, she was exhausted. She searched for shelter but found nothing. Finally, beneath the darkness, she noticed a faint orange glow between the trees. A fire. A cabin. Elena stopped. Fear immediately returned. She had no idea who lived there. It could be dangerous, but staying outside could be worse. She walked toward the light. When she reached the wooden door, she hesitated. Then she knocked. Nothing happened. She knocked again. The door suddenly opened. A tall Apache man stood there. He appeared to be in his early 30s. His long black hair was tied back. He wore simple frontier clothing and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to surviving alone. His name was Taza. His eyes immediately went to Elena's soaked clothing and trembling hands. He did not ask who she was. He did not accuse her of trespassing. He simply asked, "Are you hurt?" Elena shook her head. "No." Taza studied her face. "You are freezing. I'll leave." She turned. Taza stopped her with 3 words. "Come inside." Elena looked back. "Why?" "Because you're cold." That simple answer confused her. Nobody in her life had helped her without asking what they would receive in return. She slowly stepped inside. The cabin was small but warm. A fire burned in a stone fireplace. Taza gave her a dry blanket. Then he placed a bowl of warm food in front of her. Elena stared at it. "When was the last time you ate?" She lowered her eyes. "I don't remember." Taza said nothing. He simply placed more food beside her. Elena began eating, at first slowly, then faster. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Taza noticed, but he did not embarrass her by asking why she was crying. When she finished, she whispered, "My family threw me away." Taza remained silent for several seconds. Then he said, "People can abandon you without deciding your worth." Elena looked at him. She had never heard anyone say something like that. Later that night, Taza prepared a place for her near the fire. "You can sleep here." She hesitated. "Where will you sleep?" "Outside." "No." Taza looked at her. "I won't take your bed." He shook his head. "You're a guest." Elena's eyes filled with tears again. Called her a guest in years. She had only been called a burden. That night, she fell asleep beside the fire. Taza remained awake for much of the night, sitting near the doorway. Not because he expected anything from Elena. Not because he wanted something from her. He simply wanted to make sure she was safe. In the morning, Elena woke to the smell of coffee and fresh bread. For a moment, she forgot everything. Then she remembered. Her family. The ranch. The road. The storm. She immediately stood. "I have to go." Taza looked outside. Rain continued falling. "The river has risen. I can't stay." "You can stay until the water goes down." Elena stared at him. "Why are you doing this?" Taza looked into the fire. Then he answered, "Because everyone deserves one door that opens when they knock." Elena could not speak. Those words stayed with her. For 22 years, she had believed home was the place where she was born. Now she was beginning to understand something different. Home was not always where your blood lived. Sometimes, Home was simply the place where someone looked at you and said, "You can stay." And for the first time in her life, Elena wondered if the stranger who had opened that door might become more important to her than the family who had closed theirs. But neither Elena nor Taza knew that the Whitmore family would soon discover where she had gone. And when they came looking for her, they would expect the frightened woman they had abandoned. They would not recognize the Elena who was beginning to emerge. Because the woman who entered Taza's cabin that stormy night was broken. But the woman who would eventually walk out of it would be strong. The first few weeks at Taza's cabin changed Elena in ways she never expected. When she first arrived, she had believed she was only staying for a few nights. Then the rain continued. The river remained swollen. The mountain trails became dangerous. And Taza repeatedly told her that she could stay until the roads became safe. Elena kept waiting for him to ask something in return. He never did. That confused her more than anything. She had spent years living under people who believed kindness was something that had to be repaid. If her brothers gave her food, they reminded her that she owed them work. If Margaret gave her clothing, she expected Elena to perform extra chores. Even basic necessities had always felt like debts. But Taza was different. He gave without keeping score. That made Elena uncomfortable. So she tried to make herself useful. Every morning, before Taza woke, she started a fire. She swept the cabin. She prepared breakfast. She washed clothes. She collected water. She gathered firewood. Taza noticed. One morning, he came back from checking the horses and found Elena carrying a basket of heavy logs. He immediately walked toward her. "Put that down." Elena looked surprised. "I can carry it." "I know. Then why?" "Because you don't have to prove that you're useful." Elena stared at him. The words struck something deep inside her. She lowered the basket. Taza picked it up. "You are not paying rent for the space you occupy." Elena looked away. "You don't understand." "Then explain." She hesitated. "I wasn't working. I was told I was useless." Then Taza was silent. Then he said, "Someone told you a lie for so long that you began believing it." Elena looked at him. "And what if it's true?" Taza shook his head. "Then I would not have opened the door." That answer stayed with her. Slowly, Elena began discovering the world outside the Whitmore ranch. Taza taught her how to survive in the wilderness. He showed her which plants were safe. He taught her how to read animal tracks. He showed her how to recognize approaching storms. He taught her how to tell whether a stream was safe to drink. Elena discovered that she enjoyed learning. For the first time, nobody laughed when she asked questions. Nobody told her she was foolish. Taza simply answered. In return, Elena taught Taza things he had never learned. She showed him how to repair torn clothing. She taught him how to preserve vegetables for winter. She improved the cabin's cooking. She even began growing herbs near the doorway. The cabin slowly changed. So did Elena. Their shoulders were no longer constantly tense. She laughed occasionally. She began speaking more, and she started looking people in the eye. One afternoon, Elena heard a frightened horse outside. She rushed toward the sound. Near the edge of the property stood a young brown horse with a deep cut on its leg. Taza followed. "Stay back." Elena ignored him. She slowly approached the horse. "Easy." The animal pulled away. Elena stopped. She waited. Then she lowered herself to the ground. The horse gradually stopped struggling. Taza watched from several feet away. Eventually, Elena reached the animal. She cleaned the wound. Taza looked impressed. "You have a way with frightened things," he said. Elena glanced at him. "So do you," she replied. For the first time, Taza smiled. Their friendship became something deeper after that. They began sharing stories. Taza told Elena about his childhood. He told her about people he had lost. He explained that he had also experienced rejection. He understood what it meant to be judged by people who believed they already knew your worth. Elena realized that the quiet man standing before her carried pain of his own, but he had chosen not to become cruel because of it. That made her respect him even more. One evening, they sat outside the cabin, watching the sunset. Elena finally asked, "Why do you live alone?" Taza looked toward the mountains. "Sometimes people leave." "Did someone leave you?" "Yes." Elena waited. He did not explain further. She did not press him. That silence between them felt comfortable. Days passed, then weeks. Elena began to think of the cabin as home. That frightened her, because she knew what happened to people who became attached to something. It could be taken away. Her fear became reality one afternoon. 3 riders appeared in the distance. Elena immediately recognized them. Her brothers. She froze. Taza saw her expression. "Who are they?" "My family." The words sounded strange coming from her mouth. William dismounted first. His eyes moved toward the cabin, then toward Elena. "There you are." Elena stepped backward. William looked angry. "You caused us trouble." Elena's voice trembled. "I didn't ask you to come. You are coming home." Taza stepped outside. "She has said no." William glared at him. "This is family business." Taza answered calmly. "Then speak to her." William turned toward Elena. "You don't belong here." Elena's heart pounded. Those words were familiar. She had heard them her entire life. But this time, something inside her was different. She looked at the cabin, then at Taza, then back at William. "I belong where I choose." William laughed. "You think this man wants you?" Elena's face tightened. "He has treated me better than you ever did." William became furious. He accused Taza of manipulating her. He claimed Elena was too foolish to understand what she was doing. But Elena finally found the courage to answer. "I'm not a child." William stared at her. "You're my sister." Elena replied, "Being my brother doesn't give you the right to own me." The words silenced everyone. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Even he seemed to realize that Elena had changed. William threatened to return with the sheriff. Taza did not react. He simply said, "She is free." The brothers finally left. That night, she sat beside the fire, trembling. What if they come back? Taza sat across from her. "Then we face them." "You aren't afraid?" "I am." Elena looked surprised. Taza continued, "Being afraid does not mean you surrender." Those words became another lesson for Elena. She had spent her life believing courage meant never being afraid. Taza taught her that courage meant continuing despite fear. As the weeks passed, Elena became stronger. She began planning a future. She wanted a garden. She wanted horses. She wanted to build something of her own. Taza encouraged every idea. One evening, Elena looked at him. "You've given me a home." Taza shook his head. "No." She frowned. "I haven't? I gave you a door." He looked toward the garden Elena had planted. "You made it a home." Elena smiled. That was when she understood the difference. Taza had not saved her life so she could become dependent on him. He had helped her discover that she could build a life herself. But just as Elena began to feel secure, another threat appeared. Her brothers returned. This time, they brought papers. They claimed Elena had stolen money from the family ranch. They intended to use the accusation to force her back. Elena stared at the papers. Fear returned. But beneath that fear was something stronger. Determination. She had been abandoned once. She would not allow the people who abandoned her to control her future again. The next morning, Elena began gathering evidence. She remembered conversations. She remembered dates. She remembered the belongings her brothers had given her when they forced her out. She would face them, not as the unwanted daughter they had thrown away, but as a woman who had finally learned her own worth. And beside her would stand the man who had never once asked her to become someone else. Taza, the stranger who opened his door, the protector who never tried to possess her, and the man who was slowly becoming the person she trusted most in the world. The morning the Whitmore brothers returned, Elena knew her old life had finally come looking for her. For months, she had tried to forget the sound of William's voice telling her she was a burden. She had tried to forget the small bag of clothes he had thrown onto her bed. She had tried to forget walking away from the ranch without anyone following her. But now the past stood outside Taza's cabin. William had returned with Thomas, a local authority, and 2 witnesses from the nearby settlement. They claimed Elena had stolen money from the Whitmore ranch. They claimed Taza had taken her away against her will, and they demanded that she return. Elena stood near the cabin door, her heart pounding. For a moment, she felt like the frightened young woman who had walked through the rain months earlier. Then she remembered something Taza had told her. Being afraid does not mean you surrender. She took a slow breath. Taza stood beside her. He did not step in front of her. He did not speak for her. He simply stood close enough for her to know she was not alone. William pointed toward Elena. She belongs to our family. The local authority looked at Elena. Is that true? Elena swallowed. Yes. William smiled triumphantly. But Elena continued. They are my family by blood, but I am not their property. William's smile disappeared. The authority looked between them. Did you leave the Whitmore ranch voluntarily? Elena nodded. Yes. Why? Elena looked at her brothers. Because they told me to leave. William immediately interrupted. That isn't what happened. Elena reached into the small wooden box she had brought from the ranch. Inside was the old photograph of her father, the silver button from his coat, and the handkerchief. She held the photograph tightly. I remember exactly what happened, she said. She explained everything. She told them about the conversation she overheard. She told them about the bag of clothing. She told them that William had said she was a burden. She told them she had been given a few coins and ordered to leave. Thomas lowered his eyes. He could not deny it. William became angry. You are lying. Elena looked at him. For years, she had feared his anger. Now she realized something. His anger could no longer control her. No, she said quietly. You simply don't like hearing the truth. The authority asked whether Elena had taken any money from the ranch. William insisted she had, but Elena knew they had no evidence. She had never touched the ranch accounts. She had never taken anything except the few belongings they had given her. Thomas finally spoke. She didn't steal anything. William turned toward him. What did you say? Thomas looked uncomfortable. She didn't. For the first time, William appeared uncertain. The authority examined the papers. There was no evidence supporting the accusation. The entire claim had been created simply to force Elena back. The truth became obvious. William had not come because he missed his sister. He had come because he could not accept that she had built a life without him. The authority finally turned toward Elena. You are free to stay wherever you choose. You're really choosing this? Elena looked at the cabin. She looked at the garden she had planted. She looked at the horses. Then she looked at Taza. Most importantly, she looked at herself. Yes. William shook his head. You're throwing away your family. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. No, her voice was soft. You threw me away first. Silence filled the yard. Thomas lowered his head. William had no answer. The men eventually left. Elena remained standing until they disappeared beyond the trees. Only then did her strength disappear. She sat on the porch and began crying. Taza sat beside her. He did not tell her not to cry. He did not tell her to be strong. He simply stayed. After several minutes, Elena whispered, It's over. Taza nodded. Yes. She looked at him. What happens now? He smiled faintly. Now you decide. Elena looked toward the mountains. For so long, other people had decided everything for her. Where she lived, what she did, who she should become. Now nobody was deciding for her. She was free. And freedom frightened her almost as much as abandonment once had. What if I make the wrong choice? Taza answered. Then you make another choice. Elena smiled through her tears. That evening, she walked around the property. She looked at the garden. She looked at the horses, the stable. She looked at the small cabin that had once been a stranger's home. Then she returned to Taza. I want to stay. Taza looked at her carefully. Because you have nowhere else to go? Elena shook her head. No, she smiled. Because I want to be here. Taza's expression softened. That distinction mattered. She was not staying because she was helpless. She was not staying because she owed him something. She was staying because she had chosen this life. Over the following months, Elena and Taza continued building their home. The garden became larger. They planted vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Taza expanded the stable. Elena began caring for several horses. Their cabin became known to travelers as a safe place. Anyone who arrived hungry received food. Anyone who arrived cold received a blanket. Anyone who needed water received it. Elena never forgot the night she had stood outside Taza's door. She remembered how frightened she had been. She remembered wondering whether the stranger inside would turn her away. Because of that memory, she made a promise. Their door would remain open. One winter evening, a young woman arrived during a terrible storm. She was exhausted. Her clothes were soaked. She had nowhere to go. She stood outside the cabin and knocked. Elena opened the door. For a moment, the woman could not speak. She looked terrified. Elena recognized that expression immediately. It was the same expression she had once seen in her own reflection. Elena smiled gently. Come inside. The woman hesitated. Elena stepped aside. Quote, Yes. The woman entered. Taza placed another log on the fire. Elena prepared food. The traveler began crying. Elena sat beside her. You're safe. The woman whispered. Why are you helping me? Elena smiled. Because someone once helped me. Taza watched silently from across the room. He knew exactly what Elena meant. Years passed. The little cabin became a true home. Elena became stronger, wiser, and more confident. She no longer measured herself through her brother's opinions. She no longer wondered whether she was worthy of love. She had learned that worth was not something another person could give or take away. One evening, Elena and Taza stood outside the cabin as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The sky turned gold. The valley became quiet. Elena looked at the house. I used to think family was something you were born into. Taza looked at her, and now? She smiled. Now I think family is something you build. Taza reached for her hand. Elena held it. They stood together beneath the evening sky. She had been thrown away by the people who shared her blood. But their rejection had not ended her story. It had started another one, a better one. She had lost a house. She had found a home. She had lost a family. She had found people who truly cared for her. And most importantly, she had lost the version of herself who believed she was worthless. In her place stood a woman who knew exactly who she was. Elena looked at Taza. He shook his head. For what? For opening the door. Taza smiled. You were the one who walked through it. Elena looked toward the warm cabin. She finally understood. Taza had never rescued her from life. He had simply given her enough kindness to believe she could rescue herself. And that was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her. The story ends with the cabin glowing warmly beneath the stars, its door slightly open. A symbol of everything Elena had learned. Home is not always the place where your blood lives. Sometimes home is the place where your heart is finally allowed to stay.